It was supposed to be just another routine flight, a short journey where passengers settled into their seats, checked their phones, adjusted their belts, and thought about where they would be in a few hours. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. The aircraft moved slowly along the runway, engines steady and controlled, while flight attendants completed final checks with calm precision. Everything was exactly as it should be, and then the plane began to climb. At first, it felt smooth and predictable, the kind of ascent people barely notice anymore, just another moment in modern travel where thousands of flights follow the same script every day. But this flight would not follow that script. Minutes after takeoff, as the aircraft reached higher altitude, something changed. It didn't begin with an explosion. It began with pressure, a subtle shift in the air inside the cabin, something almost unnoticeable unless you were paying attention. And then everything broke. A violent blast tore through the side of the aircraft, not a warning, not a crack, but a sudden rupture. A section of the fuselage gave way and was ripped into the open sky, leaving behind a gaping hole where the wall had been just seconds before. In an instant, the cabin turned into chaos. Air rushed out with incredible force, the pressure dropping so fast it felt like the air itself had been pulled away. Passengers screamed as loose objects were dragged toward the opening and thrown out into the sky, phones, bags, anything not secured disappearing in seconds. Oxygen masks dropped from above, swinging violently as the aircraft shook. The sound was overwhelming, a constant roar of wind tearing through the cabin. People grabbed onto anything they could, some frozen, some shouting, others unable to even process what had just happened. Because this was not supposed to happen. Commercial aircraft are built with extreme safety margins, reinforced structures, multiple layers of protection designed to handle exactly this kind of pressure. And yet now there was a hole in the side of the plane, thousands of feet above the ground. Inside the cockpit, alarms were already screaming. Warning lights flashed as the pilots recognized the situation instantly. Rapid decompression. There was no hesitation. The aircraft began an emergency descent, fast and controlled, dropping altitude as quickly as possible to reach breathable conditions. Every second mattered. Back in the cabin, the reality was still unfolding. The hole exposed rows of seats directly to the sky, the outside world no longer separated by metal and glass but suddenly open and raw. The cold rushed in next, sharp and immediate, as freezing air flooded the cabin. Breathing became harder, the atmosphere thinner, harsher. Oxygen masks hung in front of passengers, some used, some ignored in panic, while instructions were shouted but barely heard over the relentless noise. And then the realization hit. This was real. Not turbulence, not a minor issue, but something far more serious. Something that should never have happened. Flight attendants moved quickly, relying on training and instinct, trying to stabilize the situation, keeping passengers seated, trying to bring some form of control back into the cabin. But fear spreads faster than instructions, especially when the sky is visible through a hole that should not exist. The aircraft continued its descent, every movement focused on survival. The pilots coordinated with air traffic control, declaring an emergency and requesting immediate clearance to land. There was no room for delay, no margin for error, because even if the plane remained stable, no one could be sure how much damage had been done or what might happen next. Minutes felt longer than they should, each second heavy with uncertainty. Passengers held onto their seats, some praying quietly, some staring at the opening, unable to look away. The roaring wind never stopped, filling every corner of the cabin, a constant reminder of where they were and what had just happened. And through all of it, one question remained. How could this happen? A certified aircraft, trusted, engineered to the highest standards, suddenly failing in the middle of a routine flight. Not gradually, not quietly, but violently and without warning. Outside, the world continued as normal. To everyone on the ground, it was just another flight moving through the sky. But inside that aircraft, nothing was normal anymore. As the plane descended towards safety, one truth settled in for everyone on board. They were no longer just passengers. They were inside a disaster that should never have happened, and no one yet knew if it was truly over. By the time the aircraft dropped below a safer altitude, the worst of the physical pressure had passed, but the fear inside the cabin had not. The oxygen masks still hung in front of passengers, some slowly removing them, others keeping them on as if letting go might bring the chaos back. The roaring wind had softened, but it hadn't disappeared. It was still there, rushing through the open gap in the fuselage, a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. People began to look around, really look, trying to understand what had just happened. Rows of seats were exposed to open sky, the clean structure of the aircraft torn apart in a way no one had ever imagined seeing from the inside. The damage didn't look small. It didn't look contained. It looked violent. Flight attendants moved quickly through the aisle, checking passengers, speaking louder now that the noise had slightly decreased. Their voices carried urgency but also control. They needed to keep people calm. They needed to keep order. Because panic, even after the worst moment had passed, could still make everything worse. Some passengers were shaking. Others were silent, staring forward, still processing. A few began asking questions, the same question repeated in different ways. What just happened? What broke? Are we going to land? No one had clear answers yet. Inside the cockpit, the situation was still critical. The pilots had stabilized the descent, but the aircraft was not normal. Systems were being monitored constantly. Structural integrity, cabin pressure, control response, everything was under scrutiny. Even a small secondary failure could change everything. Communication with air traffic control became more intense. The emergency had been declared. Priority landing was granted immediately. Every other aircraft in the area was being redirected. The path ahead was being cleared because there was no room for delay. Back in the cabin, the cold air continued to flow in, though less violently now. Passengers could breathe more easily, but the environment was still harsh. The hole in the aircraft wasn't just damage. It was exposure. The outside world was no longer distant. It was right there, moving past them at high speed. And then something even more unsettling began to spread through the cabin. Realization. This hadn't been a random event. Something had failed. Something that was supposed to hold under extreme conditions had simply given way. The question was no longer just about survival. It was about cause. Because planes don't just break open mid-flight. They aren't supposed to. Some passengers near the damaged section couldn't stop looking at it. The edges were jagged, uneven, as if the aircraft had been forced open from the inside out. The clean design of engineering replaced by something raw and unpredictable. It didn't look like a controlled failure. It looked like something had gone wrong at a fundamental level. Minutes passed and slowly the intensity inside the cabin shifted. The initial shock gave way to a heavy, tense awareness. People were still afraid, but now they were thinking. Trying to make sense of it. Trying to understand how close they had come to something far worse. Flight attendants continued their checks, making eye contact, offering reassurance where they could. Their calm presence became one of the few stable things in a situation that still felt unreal. The aircraft continued toward its emergency landing destination. The descent had slowed now, transitioning into a controlled approach. But even this phase carried risk. With structural damage, every movement mattered. Every adjustment had to be precise. Inside the cockpit, focus was absolute. The pilots worked through procedures, cross-checking data, preparing for landing under abnormal conditions. They knew that getting the plane down safely was not guaranteed until the wheels touched the ground and the aircraft came to a complete stop. Back in the cabin, the noise had reduced further, but silence never fully returned. There was still wind, still vibration, still that constant reminder of what had happened. Passengers remained seated, restrained not just by seatbelts, but by the understanding that movement now could be dangerous. Time moved differently. Each minute felt longer, heavier, stretched by uncertainty. People glanced at each other, at the crew, at the opening in the aircraft, then back again. Some held onto armrests tightly. Others closed their eyes, waiting for it to end. And yet, despite everything, the plane was still flying. That realization slowly began to take hold. It had not fallen. It had not lost control. It was damaged, exposed, but still moving toward safety. Hope began to return, quietly, carefully. Not strong, not certain, but present. But even as that hope grew, another thought followed close behind. If something like this could happen once, what else could go wrong before they landed? As the aircraft moved closer to its emergency landing, the tension inside the cabin didn't disappear. It changed. The chaos was gone, but in its place was something heavier, quieter, more controlled. Fear had settled in, not as panic but as awareness. Everyone understood now that they were still in danger, just in a different phase of it. The plane was flying lower, the air outside no longer as thin, but the damage remained. The open section of the fuselage continued to pull in cold air, though less violently than before. The noise had dropped from a roar to a steady rush, enough to remind everyone that the aircraft was still exposed. Still vulnerable. Passengers had stopped shouting. Conversations became low, brief, almost careful, as if speaking too loudly might disturb something fragile. Some checked on each other, asking simple questions, making sure the person next to them was okay. Others stayed silent, eyes fixed forward, replaying the moment over and over again in their minds. Because the moment itself was hard to accept. A commercial airplane designed with layers of safety had been torn open mid-flight. Not by weather. Not by collision. But by something internal. Something that should never have failed. Flight attendants continued moving through the cabin, slower now, more methodical. They checked seatbelts, reassured passengers, repeated instructions that had already been given. Their presence mattered. It gave structure to a situation that still felt unstable. Inside the cockpit, the workload had not decreased. If anything, it had become more focused. The emergency descent was complete, but the most delicate part was still ahead. Landing a damaged aircraft required precision, coordination, and constant attention to every detail. The pilots reviewed landing procedures again. Speeds, flap settings, structural considerations. Every variable mattered more now. They communicated continuously with air traffic control, receiving updates, confirming approach paths, ensuring that everything on the ground was ready. There was no margin for error. Back in the cabin, passengers began to notice something else. The plane was steady. Despite everything, despite the hole in the side, despite the decompression, the aircraft was holding together. It wasn't shaking uncontrollably. It wasn't losing altitude unexpectedly. It was flying. That realization didn't erase the fear, but it changed it. It introduced something new. Hope. Careful, cautious hope. Some passengers adjusted their masks. Others removed them completely as breathing became easier. The cold air still lingered, but it was no longer overwhelming. The immediate danger had passed, but the situation was far from normal. And still, the question remained in everyone's mind. What exactly had failed? Because aircraft are not designed to come apart like this. Every component is tested, reinforced, inspected. Layers of engineering exist to prevent exactly this kind of event. And yet here they were, looking at open sky from inside the cabin. Minutes continued to pass, each one bringing them closer to the ground. The descent had transitioned fully into approach. The aircraft aligned with the runway path, systems adjusted, speed controlled. Everything now depended on a safe landing. Passengers began to feel it. The subtle changes in motion. The slight adjustments in angle. The realization that they were getting closer. Some looked out the windows on the intact side of the plane, searching for the ground for any sign that this was almost over. Others kept their focus inside, unwilling to look anywhere else. Flight attendants took their positions, preparing for landing. Their instructions became more direct now, more focused. Seatbelts tight. Heads back. Stay in position. The cabin grew quieter. Not silent but controlled. Everyone waiting. Everyone aware. Because landing wasn't just a formality anymore. It was the final test. Inside the cockpit, the pilots guided the aircraft carefully, every movement deliberate. They adjusted controls with precision, compensating for the damage, maintaining stability. The runway was now within reach. Closer. Closer. Back in the cabin, passengers felt the descent more clearly now. The ground approaching. The speed reducing. The tension rising again, but this time different. This time it was focused on one moment. Touchdown. If they made it through that, it would be over. But until that moment happened, nothing was guaranteed. The aircraft continued forward, descending steadily, carrying everyone on board toward an ending no one could yet fully believe in. The runway was now directly ahead, visible through the cockpit windows, steady and within reach, but the tension inside the aircraft had returned to its peak. Not chaotic, not loud, but sharp and focused. Every person on board understood that this was the moment everything depended on. Inside the cabin, no one spoke. Seatbelts were tight, bodies pressed back into their seats, hands gripping armrests or folded tightly together. Even those who had been whispering moments ago had fallen silent. The fear was no longer about what had happened. It was about what was about to happen. Because landing a damaged aircraft is never routine. The plane continued its approach, descending carefully, speed controlled, alignment precise. From the outside, it might have looked normal, just another aircraft preparing to land. But inside, nothing was normal. Every movement carried weight. Every vibration felt amplified. Inside the cockpit, the pilots were completely locked in. Their focus was absolute, every input calculated, every adjustment deliberate. They monitored the aircraft's response constantly, ready to react to anything unexpected. There was no room for distraction, no second chances. The runway grew larger. Closer. Closer. Back in the cabin, passengers could feel it. The subtle shift in motion, the change in engine sound, the lowering altitude. Some closed their eyes. Others stared forward, unblinking, waiting for the moment of contact. Flight attendants remained in position, faces controlled, posture steady. Their presence was calm, but their awareness was sharp. They knew that even at this stage things could still go wrong. The aircraft descended further, now just moments away. And then, touchdown. The wheels hit the runway with force, not rough but firm, real, undeniable. A jolt ran through the cabin, followed by the sound of tires gripping the ground. For a split second, no one reacted. It was as if the entire plane needed confirmation that it had actually happened. Then the deceleration began. The aircraft slowed rapidly, engines reversing thrust, brakes engaging, every system working together to bring the plane under control. The cabin filled with the sound of friction and power, but this time it wasn't chaos. It was control. Relief started to break through. Not instantly, but slowly. Passengers began to breathe differently, deeper, steadier. Some looked around, almost in disbelief. Others lowered their heads, tension finally releasing from their bodies. A few couldn't hold back their emotions, tears forming as the reality set in. They had landed. But the situation was not completely over yet. Emergency vehicles were already moving alongside the aircraft as it slowed, lights flashing, crews ready for any possible complication. The plane continued rolling down the runway until it finally came to a complete stop. And then, stillness. For the first time since the explosion, everything was quiet. No roaring wind. No violent noise. Just the low hum of systems and the distant sound of emergency responders outside. Inside the cabin, people began to move slightly, cautiously, as if unsure whether it was truly safe. The hole in the fuselage was still there, a visible reminder of everything that had happened, but now it felt different. Less threatening. More surreal. Flight attendants quickly resumed control, giving clear instructions, guiding passengers through the next steps. Their voices were steady, confident, bringing order back into a situation that had felt uncontrollable just minutes earlier. Doors opened. Fresh air entered the cabin, no longer forced, no longer violent. Just normal. Calm. Passengers began to exit, one by one, stepping out onto solid ground. Some moved quickly, eager to leave. Others slowed down, taking in the moment, realizing how close they had come to something far worse. Outside, emergency crews surrounded the aircraft, assessing, securing, ensuring that everyone was safe. The damaged section of the plane was now fully visible, and even from the outside it was shocking. A clean break, a missing panel, an opening that should never have existed on a modern aircraft. People stood at a distance, looking back at the plane, trying to process it. Because survival doesn't always feel like relief at first. Sometimes it feels like disbelief. Inside that aircraft, just minutes earlier, everything had been on the edge. And now they were standing on the ground, alive, safe, trying to understand how it had all ended without becoming something much worse. But even as the immediate danger had passed, one thing was becoming clear. This wasn't just an emergency landing. This was something bigger. Something that would need answers. In the hours after the landing, the story spread faster than anyone expected. What had happened inside that aircraft was no longer just an emergency. It became a question the entire world was asking at the same time. How does a plane break open in midair and still land safely? Images began to circulate almost immediately. The damaged section of the aircraft, the missing panel, the exposed interior. From the outside, it didn't look like a minor failure. It looked like something that should have ended in disaster. And yet, every passenger had survived. But survival wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something else. Investigations started right away. Aviation authorities moved quickly, securing the aircraft, collecting data, preserving every detail. Because in aviation, incidents like this are not just studied. They are dissected. Every piece matters. Every second is analyzed. And very quickly, attention focused on one specific area. The panel that had blown out. It wasn't supposed to be a weak point. It wasn't supposed to fail. In fact, it was designed to remain sealed under extreme pressure differences, reinforced, secured, tested. But something had gone wrong. Not gradually. Not over time. Suddenly. The more experts looked into it, the more concerning the situation became. This wasn't damage caused by an external force. It wasn't a bird strike. It wasn't weather. It was structural. Something in the design, the installation, or the assembly had failed. And that raised a much bigger question. If it could happen once, could it happen again? Airlines began reviewing their fleets. Inspections were ordered. Aircraft of similar configuration were grounded temporarily, not as a reaction to fear, but as a response to uncertainty. Because until the exact cause was understood, no one could take the risk. Passengers around the world followed every update. For many, this wasn't just news anymore. It was personal. Because flying is built on trust. Trust in engineering. Trust in systems. Trust that when you step onto an aircraft, everything has been designed to prevent exactly this kind of event. And now that trust had been shaken, experts began to speak openly. Some pointed toward manufacturing issues. Others toward installation errors. There were discussions about quality control, about inspection processes, about whether something had been overlooked. Because aviation failures are rarely simple. They are layers. A chain of small decisions, small oversights, small weaknesses that align at the worst possible moment. And when they do, the result can be sudden, unexpected, and dangerous. But in this case there was something else. Something that stood out. The aircraft had survived. Despite the failure. Despite the decompression. Despite the damage. It had remained controllable. It had landed safely. That was not luck alone. That was design. Redundancy. Training. Systems working exactly as they were meant to in the worst possible scenario. The pilots had done everything right. The crew had done everything right. And the aircraft, even damaged, had done what it was built to do. Protect the people inside it. As more details emerged, the focus shifted from shock to understanding. What exactly failed and why? Could it have been prevented? What changes needed to be made to ensure it never happened again? These questions would take time to answer. Investigations in aviation always do. They move carefully, deliberately, because the goal is not just explanation. It is prevention. For the passengers who had been on that flight, the experience didn't end when they stepped off the plane. Moments like that stay. The sound. The pressure. The sudden realization that something impossible had just happened. And yet, so does something else. The moment the wheels touched the ground. The moment they realized they had made it. For many, that moment would stay just as strongly as the fear that came before it. Because survival changes perspective. It turns routine into something fragile. It reminds you how quickly normal can disappear. And how important it is that, when something goes wrong, everything else works exactly as it should. The aircraft would be studied. The cause would eventually be found. Changes would be made. Procedures updated. Designs reviewed. Because that is how aviation moves forward. Every incident, every failure becomes part of a system that learns, adapts, and improves. But the memory of that flight would remain. A routine journey that became something else. A moment where everything could have gone wrong. And somehow didn't.